Well, hello everybody at CMLS. My name is Joe Rand and I'm the Executive Director of the Broker Public Portal, and I have the honor of moderating this terrific panel on the MLS and fair housing. The MLS and fair housing. And with me, I have three really terrific panelists. I have Katie Johnson, Myra Jolivet, and Jim Yockel. I'll let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their background with this topic. Katie, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, Katie Johnson. I'm the General Counsel and Chief Member Experience Officer of the National Association of Realtors. In my role as Chief Member Experience Officer, I get to work with all the teams at NAR that deal with the MLS, professional standards, and diversity and inclusion efforts. So we have a lot going on in that world, so I'm honored to be here and talk about it with you all.
Myra?
Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Myra Jolivet, as he said, and I am currently a strategic planning and strategic communications consultant who also does some DEI blended into that. My background is TV news, as well as strategic communications in corporate agency environments, as well as in politics. And politics led me to the real estate industry. My last employment was MLS listings in Silicon Valley. And I ran 4 departments of the 8 at MLS listings. So I'm really happy to be here. This is a topic that I'm passionate about, and I look forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you. And Jan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Yockel. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors and the Upstate New York MLS in Rochester in the Finger Lakes region of New York State.
All right, well, good to have you all aboard. So we're talking about the MLS and fair housing, and obviously, with regard to agents, with regard to brokers that are working directly with consumers, the fair housing implications of what they do on a day-to-day basis are obvious. But what role does the MLS have to play in either directly with consumers or supporting brokers and agents? How does the MLS? What responsibilities do they have to ensure fair housing in our country?
Well, I don't think it can be overstated by saying that the MLS is perhaps the greatest fair housing tool available in the real estate industry. And that's for brokerages as well as consumers. And I think it's because of its core tenets and its foundation on why it exists. And succinctly, I think that's accuracy, collaboration, and transparency. And because it provides all of that in the real estate industry, and as long as it continues to provide all of that in the real estate industry, it will provide the most access to real property for all people.
Totally. One of the roles at the MLS that I enjoyed supervising was in training and lifting awareness. And I think the MLS has a great opportunity to list what we talked about earlier in preparation, unconscious bias. And having brokers and agents begin to recognize things that all of us need to recognize. We all have a bit of that in us. And so I think training and awareness elevates it and brings it to a point where you realize, whoa, I'm about to break the law. And I hadn't even thought about it. So I think within the MLS training, there's a good opportunity and a space to provide that.
Yeah, I would just add, I think as a system, the openness and the broad and free access to the MLS is one of the most powerful tools, because it's hard to tell someone there isn't something available in a particular neighborhood when it's right there on the MLS, on thousands of broker sites and agent sites and national portals. And I think that's a really powerful tool to start eliminating what I call opportunities for bias to exist. And that's the biggest one, is when a consumer says, hey, what's available in this neighborhood? We can't say, well, there's nothing available right now, because they can all see it for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that the training and what Jim just described is really accountability as well. Because of the access and the accuracy and widespread distribution of the data, it is available to all. So it keeps us accountable for providing those equal services. At NAR, we, under the guidance of our Director of Fair Housing, Brian Green, we have initiated a program called ACT, and that is accountability, culture change, and training. So just like Myra said, training is a critical component of affecting positive change in fair housing affordable housing, equality, but also needs to be with it accountability and cultures change. And I think there's a lot that the MLS can do in those world, and in those arenas as well.
Definitely. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, well, I don't get why we have to even, worry about these things. There's no racism, there's no this, there's no that. So when I was talking about elevation of awareness, I don't know if people realize that, the FHA at one point would not authorize builders who sold to African Americans. That was after the New Deal of 1933. And so that lands within your consciousness. That's a legacy. And so when we're trying to work to change something that is so systemically, has systemic origins, it takes a grander effort than just saying, okay, this is the law and you will comply. I think we need a cause and effect discussion. I think we need to look at history. We need to bust some myths. And I think there are several layered approaches that an MLS can play a role in.
I totally agree. And real estate practitioners and MLS leaders know about that history if they've read The Color of Law or just listened to Richard Rothstein's presentation about The Color of Law. And to your point, I think that training and culture change begins with the understanding. First of all, acknowledging that there's a problem, and then understanding what it is. And so I would highly recommend that everyone pick up Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, and read it, or make it mandatory reading for your leaders, because it provides a base understanding of where we've been. And I think you have to understand that in order to know where we want to go.
I want to ask something of Jim, because what we've kind of talked about, it strikes me that there's kind of two ways of approaching this. And one of them is kind of a prophylactic way of, let's set up, the transparency of the MLS is a real step forward in being able to prevent this. And, a prophylactic set of rules that restrict what agents or brokers do as a way of ensuring that they're providing consistent experiences and consistent treatment and things like that. That's a big part of it. And then I think what Myra was kind of talking about is more this affirmative raise consciousness issue, which isn't about sort of saying, okay, here are the words you can't say, here are the processes you have to go through that are designed to eliminate differential treatment. But so that's a much more ambitious program, because that really requires a cultural change, like what Katie was talking about. So I'd ask Jim, because you're running an MLS. So how do you accomplish both of those? What's like you take either side of that for now and just tell me, how do we get buy-in from the brokers and agents to do that, to be part of that mission?
I'll take the how does the MLS system itself play this role, and I think buy-in is there. I think that most of the people in this industry want to do better and want to further fair housing laws and access to housing. What I mentioned in my previous comment was there exist in these systems what I call opportunities to discriminate that we don't know about and aren't really paying attention to. And so we're approaching it from the standpoint of, if we can identify each of those, no matter how small, and eliminate them, solve them, make them better, provide training or resources, that gradually takes us one step further down the road each time. And some are big, some are little, and the MLS as a system and as a network of systems across the country has a really powerful role to play in creating this consistent, open, place where everybody can go, whether you're a buyer or a seller or a participant in the industry. This inside the MLS is the place where you have full access and full information. And that is one of the most powerful tools to fighting discrimination. And I think it comes back to in the Newsday report, one of the things that stuck with me the most was some of the paired testers said they didn't feel they were discriminated against until they saw the other side. And then they know. So how can you help someone be protected when they don't even know that they're being discriminated against? So we're approaching it from the MLS system side, saying, let's look at every piece of our system, every process, every rule, every name, every definition, and every point we can eliminate that little teeny opportunity for someone to make a bad decision, we're moving the whole industry forward.
That's great.
I agree totally that those are all great efforts, and every little step will help us reach a more positive outcome. So well done. I think that's great. And I think that when the MLS is strategically planning, and Myra probably helps them do this, but strategically planning to affect change and to have a comprehensive fair housing DEI strategy, of accountability, culture change, and training, I encourage you to think of it in those terms. I think you look at the human side. What kind of training can we do and provide to our participants? For example, the equal services checklist, NAR, we have a sample equal services checklist that we say, use this with every single client. And if you do, you can track and compare how you provide them. But then there's a data component too. And I think that's the untapped arena that we haven't really looked into. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the presenter from the Brookings Institute on how AI is impacting our decisions, because one specific area that is notoriously problematic is school data, and the ratings, the rankings, and the school data that's out there just perpetuates racism, perpetuates the segregation of our communities. So I think as accuracy and transparency data providers at the MLSR, really digging into school data could be impactful.
I think you know something important about consistency, just that's a really big part of this. I think that generally speaking in the industry, we don't provide consistent experiences, even outside the fair housing context, just that we're not really good, because it's an industry built upon independent contractors who the brokers don't feel that they can exert control over how the agent does their business. And that tends to bleed into even compliance issues. So that's like one of the real challenges here. And so I'm kind of curious, as a broker, you can enforce certain compliance measures like, okay, if you're ever going to ask for a pre-qualification letter, you got to ask it of everybody. You can only ask it to some people and not others. And that's like one of those prophylactic rules that ensures consistency. But what is the role of the MLS in doing that? And how does the MLS, what are some of the practical things that MLS can do to enforce a consistent treatment? Because, as a broker, my frustration is that I'm not in the living room, I'm not in the car, I can't see what the agents are doing. I'm not like a guy running a hotel that I can see what my employees are doing. And MLS is already either one further removed, like they're removed like 2 layers between the consumer. So what kind of things can the MLS do to ensure that at a ground level, that consumer is getting consistent experiences? Anyone?
I'll jump in. I think it comes back to training, and there are a lot of challenges there. And I think Katie brought up a really difficult challenge, which is, school information. So for years, we've been asking realtors to be the local expert, the neighborhood expert. But at the same time, we're telling them, you can't really talk about schools. You can't really talk about crime statistics. So how do we, as an industry, empower our members to be a local expert and be a value to the consumer while still kind of staying in the lane they need to stay in from fair housing perspective? And that's difficult, and I don't have a solution yet, but those are the kind of things that we need to look at differently in terms of training. Like I said before, I think the buy-in is there. Most people want to do this. They just don't know how or don't have the resources. And so our approach is, let's get the industry together and rally everybody around this and find these solutions.
You guys are bringing up some really great stuff, and I'm not going to say I have an answer, but it makes me wonder if maybe there are some strategic partnerships that MLSs could invest in. Because, when you talk about paired testing, that's just one example of how you're unaware. I remember on the MLS side, we would enable anonymous tips, so you could report improper behavior, because there was a hesitancy among agents. If I report someone, I may sit across from them next year in a deal. And so maybe part of the strategy is to eliminate those intimidation factors with some strategic partnerships on, for example, like I said, paired testing or some of the other things that lead to quantifying enforcement. There's one other thing. I recently met the developer, well, of course, I'm near Silicon Valley, so I'm going to meet a lot of developers. But this particular guy has quantified, he has a tool, a tech tool, that quantifies unconscious bias. Now, it's primarily for HR. It's not specifically for real estate. But I'm thinking that there might be other tools that can, go through emails, it goes through sentiment, it goes through all these things and makes real tangible data of daily activity within possibly a brokerage or within an MLS. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought. And regarding the, back to the school data, what Jim said, we've always told members, don't provide that data, point them to third-party sources. But the problem is that, especially with school data, the third-party sources are flawed and the data is flawed. So what can we do to correct that? So absent a correction, don't use it. Go to the schools, make connections with the administrators, have the agents on the ground have a contact at the school and say, hey, potential buyer, I'd like to introduce, give you a tour of the school, and really let them know the community and the schools that way. And just quickly, Joe, to your question about consistency, I don't know because I don't run any MLSs, but I suspect there's a lot of opportunity to help with that consistency. Jim mentioned the Newsday investigation, and that revealed that our members or real estate professionals in Long Island weren't always giving the same amount of properties or the same inventory of properties to people based on their race. And if the MLS had an easy technological way to track who your clients are and what properties you're giving them and then report on that, I think it raises the level of awareness and hopefully the level of consistency that all clients will get.
Or even you could see like just speaking theoretically, just like a tool that allows an agent to just generate a complete and comprehensive list of all properties that comply with a certain price point. Because price point is not the issue. The issue is geography, that they're making decisions about where to show houses. So even if you said, well, you know what a good compliance issue would be, every time you take a buyer out, and that buyer has this price point, you plug in the bottom, you plug in the top, you do it, and it automatically shoots them an email. That's every property. So they definitely get baseline every property within that price point that they can then look and say, well, why didn't my realtor show me these? One of the things that you guys have brought up with the training being such a cornerstone part of this, the question is, how do we get the people to training? And Myra, I would ask you, how do you talk to somebody who, when you say, I think it's good for you to take this training, their response is, well, I don't see color. I don't have a problem. I'll sell a house to anybody. I don't have an issue with people. I see nothing but green. I hear that all the time. Nothing but green. How do you explain to somebody who's unconscious of these things? How do you get them conscious of it?
Right, and that is a training, that's a training strategy as well, because where you begin with someone who quote unquote doesn't see color or any of those things, who doesn't necessarily want to recognize there are differences in disparate treatment, you begin by self-examination with them. They can take a screening, and that screening can determine their unconscious bias. And once, I think Joe, you said it, or one of you guys said that, once that there is a process where you can surface what is deeply seated within you. Now, in terms of enforcement, I guess we would have to look to NAR whether or not it would be a required training course. The MLS can't necessarily require, as I understand it, the required courses have to do with the MLS technology. But we'd have to probably lift that up and really, as an industry, say, we want to require that you have a course of self-examination about where you have unconscious bias and how this could potentially impact families, your practice, and the business of the brokerage. And tie it once again to economic results, because ultimately, this type of discrimination lands in an economic space.
Well, absolutely. As home ownership is, the creator of generational wealth, the fact that so many were unable to buy homes or homes of value decades ago has led to where we are now in the inequality of income and wealth status between races. So I totally agree, Myra, and I think that in order to, Joe, when you say people who think they don't see color, that's just acknowledging they don't fully understand the problem. And so we gotta first, get them to understand, admit implicit bias is real. At NAR, we have an 1 hour implicit bias training video, and now we're developing it into a 3-hour course program for brokers and agents, and certainly MLS staff and association staff can do it as well. So we hope that will be a way, just an introductory way to get everybody on the same page of understanding what implicit bias is and how to avoid it.
Joe, one more quick thing on that. When people say to me, oh, I don't see your color, I'll tell you, I want people to see my color, and I want them to ask me about my experiences. I'm from a mixed race family. We have a little bit of everything, and that's been going on for generations in my family. And so when people ask me about that, I love talking about it. I love sharing, because and I love hearing other experiences. I think that's one wall we need to knock down. That whole thing, well, I don't want to say that because you're Black. No, say it. If you're going to be real with me, I can be real with you. So I just wanted to sort of add that to the I don't see color piece.
And that's a point made too in NAR's At Home with Diversity program. Jim, I don't know if you've offered that at your association, but many associations have for many years, and definitely within the last 3 months, offered the At Home with Diversity certificate program, which again is like a 4-hour training course on understanding the differences, as Myra said, and why that's important and good in facilitating real estate transactions. So I highly recommend you check out At Home with Diversity.
Yeah. And I'd like to go back to a comment Joe made about, maybe one of the protections could be when someone starts a search with a realtor, they get this full list of everything in a price range, irrespective of geography. Those are the kind of system-based things that are relatively easy to do. And I think that's a great idea. So the main point is, I think we need to get our industry together and get brokers, agents, MLS executives, association executives to just brainstorm what are all of these things. Where can we make these little improvements? And one of the ones that we came up with that we're working with CMLS on is we've heard in our region and others that agents feel like at the time an offer is made, sometimes the buyer puts in a great offer, and maybe that offer isn't accepted based on their name that appears in the purchase contract. So why are we doing that? Why are we creating this opportunity for the seller to potentially unconsciously discriminate against a buyer based on the name that appears in the contract? So anything that we can do as an industry to just find these areas, that's the kind of the training I'm focusing on as an MLS. On the association side, we do all of the things that you've mentioned, but I think it's important to keep digging into the system and how we work with our vendors and how form systems interact with MLS systems to see what else can we do.
And there's little things and there's big things, but there's also the idea that a lot of the things that the MLS can do to ensure consistency and transparency and whatnot affects everybody, but has particular impact on ensuring fair housing, like the clear cooperation policy. Like clear cooperation policy, people talked about the inherent unfairness of pocket listings and how it hurts the industry, how it hurts the buyers, how it hurts even the seller because it doesn't provide the largest possible buyer audience. But it was also something that was such an easy gateway to discriminatory conduct that, if you're not providing your listing across the platform, it's, then you're really only showing it to the people that you know. Well, who are the people you know? The people that look like you, the people that are in your same geography, same economic condition. I mean, that was a big thing that was industry based, but had it can have a dramatic impact in ensuring fair treatment.
Totally agree. I mean, as I said at the outset, totally agree, and I'll defend it to the ends of the earth. But as I said, the outcome, the MLS is so unique and successful by creating efficient and competitive markets because it has accurate data, because real estate professionals collaborate with each other and share their inventory, and because that is available and accessible in a transparent way. when you get into not sharing the data and only these pocket listing scenarios, you're eroding the foundation of the MLS, and therefore, eliminating it as a fair housing tool that it is and should be. One of the things about consistency I just want to add too, that might be little, but I'd argue that it might be big too, and have big impact, is creating a public commitment. We have a Realtors Fair Housing Declaration, and I think it's time to brush it off and sharpen it up, and encourage not just your practitioners and subscribers to use their declaration, their Fair Housing Declaration, with all their clients, but perhaps the MLS should adopt one too, a public commitment that is shared with all users of an MLS, so that all users are immediately put on notice of their rights and expectations with regards to the property that they're going to be viewing.
And I piggyback on that to make it local, that MLSs should also, in addition to that, build a strategic event. In other words, add to their strategic planning the subject matter that we've all been talking about, so that it's appropriate to their market, because every market is not the same. And the LIBOR strategies work for Long Island after the Newsday article. There are strategies that work depending upon where you are and what your population is. So I think that should be just a framework, part of the MLS and their strategic planning.
Definitely. If you're looking for resources too, NAR.Realtor, we have a lot of that data available to you in market service areas. So you can just click on your market service area and find out what the home ownership rates are by race, income, equality. Lots of good information as a starting point for that strategic planning exercise.
We only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we talked about something that, we've talked about education and training for the agents and the brokers. We talked about the systems that are going to impact how practitioners interrelate with their clients. But one of the other ways in which the MLS could be more responsive and ensure fair housing would be for the MLS itself to be more inclusive and representative of the communities that it services, like that the board, that the leadership, that the membership, and the extent to which the MLS can help the membership ensure that the membership is diverse by aiding in those kind of efforts to diversify the brokerage community as well as the agent community. What are some of the responsibilities? I'm right now on a task force, for example, with the One Key MLS that's creating a task force to do exactly that. We're choosing the people to try to make One Key more universal, more inclusive. What are some of the responsibilities the MLS has to do that, and how can they accomplish that?
Well, I think that's a great point, because I noticed when I entered this industry, after working in several other industries, it was probably one of the least diverse industries I'd been a part of. So I think definitely some HR strategies, some goals even. I know people hate that word, but I would put it out there. We want to be reflective of the people we serve. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit of changing an outlook. In our MLS leadership, we have very strong broker involvement, but they're focused on their business. So I think it comes back to the industry as a whole, getting everybody together, saying, listen, this is strategically important for the long term, and we need to focus on this, and putting some groups together, some task forces to look at these things independently, whether it's locally at your MLS, like Joe mentioned, or nationally. I'll mention the Council of MLS is putting together a fair housing task force to look specifically at how the MLS can do a better job in its lane of systems, rules, process, procedures. So if you can get involved in one of those, get involved. If there isn't any in your area, start one.
And, at NAR, and it's occurred to me everywhere, we have member groups focused on intentionally improving and increasing the diversity and inclusion of volunteer leadership. Our diversity committee and our strategic advisory thinking committee are working on developing ideas for that. And because all of the MLSs and associations are doing that too, we really should be more thoughtful and about working together to promote whatever outcomes there might be, to be more intentional about bringing up diverse leadership. And so I just, hopefully we can all work together to have make some real changes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I want to thank you all. We're out of time, so I want to thank Katie, Myra, Jim. Jim, I'm giving you the Room Radar Award for the best background. Mine's fake, but yours, you have pictures of your kids. That's always a winner. Always a winner. My thanks to all of you. I thought was a great conversation. We got a lot out, and I hope good luck to everybody articulating and executing this in the future. Thank you all.